Sure, if I'm live. Okay, looks like I'm live. So hi, I'm Nicole Cutler, and my broadcast is about my advice not to kickstart your game. This is advice that I give a lot of new creators. So before I start, I I guess I'll just give people a few seconds to see that I'm live, and see if there are any questions. Um, I do want to say before I start that I am the production manager and operations manager for Pandasaurus Games, but this broadcast is not representative of their views. This is my view, my advice to new creators. Um, this is a viewpoint that I've had for many years prior to even working with, hi Pam, prior to working with Pandasaurus. Primarily, this point of view comes from working with smaller publishers, new creators, and talking to peers about experiences. So I just want to make sure that it's very clear this isn't representative of Pandasaurus's views in any way. A few other things that I wanted to make sure to say is that I do recognize that there are multiple types of creators. Um, there are existing companies who have already made board games, who have already published games, who are already in the distribution world, who are starting to explore Kickstarter as a way to have a larger audience. That's not the type of creator that I'm talking to right now in this specific broadcast with this advice. There are also plenty of creators who have been using Kickstarter for years, who use it as a part of their business model, who have a lot of experience with the platform. Again, not talking to that type of creator. This advice is specifically toward new game designers who have just designed their first, second, third game, who don't know what to do with it, thinking about pitching it to a publisher. Maybe they want to try Kickstarter if they've seen, other success on Kickstarter and they're excited by it. Hi, Debbie. I just kind of want to bring this perspective because it's easy to see, the lights and the excitement of a Kickstarter, and not as easy to see what's behind the curtain. So that's the kind of creator that I want to talk to right now, the one who might be just exploring it for the very first time. I also do want to say that I realize that Kickstarter is an incredibly invaluable tool. That it's made our industry grow 10 times what it would have been without it because it's bringing a lot of accessibility. So I'm not knocking Kickstarter as a platform. I just want to talk to new creators who might not realize what they're getting into when they start a Kickstarter campaign. And I am going to be a little pessimistic. I think it's important because this community is generally very positive, and that's great. But a lot of the advice is, yeah, you can do it, and it's easy, and it is. It's more making your own game is more accessible now than it's ever been, between conventions and accessibility to manufacturers, and the internet and our peers and Kickstarter. It's really much easier than it would have been to make a game 30 years ago, but it's almost too easy in the sense of you can really get in over your head before you realize what you're committing to. So I'm going to take more of a pessimistic viewpoint here just to kind of balance that out. Okay, so the first big point I want to make when talking about starting your own Kickstarter is really making it clear that when you start a Kickstarter, you're starting a business. I know a lot of creators kind of approach Kickstarters as this viewpoint of like, well, I'll try it, and if it works out great, then I'll start a publishing company. If it doesn't, no big deal. But when you start a Kickstarter, you're manufacturing a product that you're essentially selling via pre-sales, but you're essentially going to be collecting money for this product that you've had manufactured, and you're opening up yourself to all the business liabilities, to all the tax liabilities that come with it. So the second that you have a successful campaign, you're in a business. You have tax liabilities, you have business taxes, sales tax in your state, legal liabilities. So if someone chokes on a piece of your game, that's something that could happen. If anything goes wrong, you are the person who created this product. So that's something that is really important to keep in mind, that you can't just decide later on whether or not you want to be a business. You are conducting business. A second thing that I really want to make sure to mention is that successful campaigns aren't always successful campaigns. I've seen a lot of people lose money on Kickstarter, not really knowing what they're getting into. And I'm not just talking about, creators who have invested in art or, invested in graphic design or setting up the page and then not funding. It's if you don't properly calculate what's going into your campaign, it's very easy for expenses to get away from you. And I've seen successful campaigns be unprofitable at the end. I've had a friend in particular who's lost tens of thousands of dollars on a very successful six-figure campaign. So, and it's not abnormal, because the thing is, when you're starting your first campaign, you don't know what you don't know. You don't necessarily know what shipping is going to cost, and you don't necessarily know, if your product's seized in customs. Like, that's a thing that can happen. These are expenses that could happen, that just because you see that a Kickstarter funded or even overfunded doesn't necessarily mean that it was profitable in the end. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind. There are a lot of upfront costs that go into campaigns. So when you're talking about kickstarting your own game, a lot of the time you're going to need to spend art upfront. And if your campaign doesn't fund or barely funds, you're not necessarily making that money back. So that's something really important to keep in mind. It's really easy to miscalculate. So there are a lot of factors when you're going into, when you're deciding on the cost of your game. It's really important to quote your project in full. So design your game, talk to manufacturers, figure out exactly what it's going to cost. A lot of the time, new creators don't necessarily know to take that step before they launch. You look at a game and you think, oh, this game's going to be, a similar weight to Azul. I'll sell it for $30 and it'll be a good deal. But unless you're actually quoting it with the manufacturer, you might be selling it for not enough to make up that margin. There are a lot of the times new creators tend to want to offer free shipping or EU-friendly shipping or discounted shipping, and sometimes even based off the fact that previous Kickstarter campaigns, even new creators have done it before. And a lot of the times what has happened behind the scenes is that they may have lost a lot of money. Maybe they don't even do another campaign. Maybe sometimes the Kickstarter creator didn't even fulfill the project. But there's kind of been this expectation that you have to offer free shipping, you have to offer discounted shipping, you have to offer EU friendly, and it kind of spirals into this catch-22 where you have to do it because the other person did it, but if they didn't make money, you don't necessarily know that after the fact. So it's really important to to keep in mind that you should be calculating these costs beforehand and not necessarily offering things just because another campaign did it. My notes here. Another way that I've seen people lose money on a Kickstarter campaign is under the assumption that, you know, you'll overproduce because it'll be in distribution later. And while it might be a good idea to produce a little bit extra, it's very easy to overproduce. And when you overproduce, you can end up with dead stock. And when you're running a Kickstarter campaign, gosh, it's so weird to be just talking to myself, talking into another. When you run a Kickstarter campaign, it's easy to see, well, you know, I've had 500 backers, and that means my product is, you know, there's a lot of interest in it, so I should produce more for going to distribution. And what a new creator might not realize is that it's actually very hard to get into distribution, even with conventions, even with the networks that we have and the networks that we make. There are companies that I know who have been producing games for years who are struggling to get into distribution. There are companies that are in distribution who might only sell 500 games after a Kickstarter or at all. And so a successful Kickstarter isn't necessarily indicative of long-term sales. And it's very easy to end up with stock that doesn't actually move later on. And that's something important to keep in mind, because if you're making a game that costs, you know, $5, and that's about what it's going to cost if you're selling it for 30, it should cost about $5. Sorry, I'm seeing comments. So if you're making a game, selling it for 30, it should cost about $5. And if you make, you know, 500 extra copies, we're talking about $2,500 extra into your manufacturing. And that's coming from your profit if you don't sell it. That's $2,500 that would have otherwise been profit. That's just either going to get severely discounted, or in some cases, you know, discarded. Honestly, I mean, I've seen stock get discarded because it doesn't sell, and there is a cost to storing it long term. There is, you know, you can be spending $150 a month just to store this product that you might end up having to discard. So it's really important to factor in not overproducing if you are going to make your own Kickstarter. It's so much better to go back and make a second print run than it is to put cash down for something that you might not be able to use later on. I'm just going to take a second and read some comments. Debbie says, I agree that people underestimate what it takes to run a Kickstarter. It's the same massive amount of work, a lot of the time invested to raise 10K as to raise 1 million, and many campaigns are not profitable, and even big publishers order too much. Yeah, it's even big publishers, it's hard to estimate, and the bigger your campaign is, the harder it is to estimate, because you don't know if that's just an initial burst, if that's going to last. You don't. It's even harder to predict. Let's see. Another thing that is important to keep in mind when you're making your own game is that there are things that you might not know about the manufacturing process that a printer is not necessarily going to walk you through. So there are requirements that have to go on the back of the box, such as a CE marking, which is required to sell product in Europe, choking hazards depending on the age range of your game, that all have to go on the back of the box. And if you aren't familiar with that, it's easy to overlook. And I've seen scenarios in which, you know, a publisher or a new creator has made a game, has printed it not knowing that these things are required in the back, and they could have their product seized in customs, or they could be forced to stop selling in Europe, even if it's a popular game, because they don't have these required markings on the back. Another thing to keep in mind is testing. So there are two types of tests. There's the EN71, I think, that's the CE compliance in Europe, and the American, gosh, I don't remember the name of it, ASTM 963, I want to say. These are the requirements to sell the products in America. So these are testings that you would have done at the factory. They would take the product from the production line, send it to a testing factory, and get these certifications sent back to you. These cost between $800 and $2,500 to do, depending on the game. The more detailed your game is, the more components you have, the more expensive it's going to be. And why is this important? Well, there have been more instances lately where they have been required to sell it in distribution. So for the longest time, a lot of publishers, even mid-tier publishers that I know, didn't really worry about these types of tests because it wasn't very often that it was enforced. And recently, I've been talking to other publishers. I've had this experience where specific sales avenues have been cracking down, saying we need these testings, and now it's become more important than ever. So these are things that a new creator might not keep in mind when doing their first production run. And so it's really important to kind of understand that you don't know what you don't know, and it's really important to not get sucked into the lights of a successful Kickstarter campaign that your peers are making, and realize what goes into the back half of it. Jenna asks, I'm curious, which Kickstarters have you run before? What was the process like for you? Have you considered Indiegogo? So some of the Kickstarters that I've run were in conjunction with Jelly Bean Games. I helped them run, I think, about 10 Kickstarter campaigns, starting with The Lady and the Tiger. So we did ninjutsu, Jelly Bean shirts. We've done, I helped them raise, I want to say, ballpark of $250,000 thereabouts on Kickstarter across 5 to 10 campaigns. I definitely learned more with each game. That being said, we always did small games, and the reason that I advocate to do small games as your first campaign is because the bigger campaign you have as a starting point, as a practice campaign, the more you can lose if you miscalculate. So if you miscalculate shipping by $1 per pledge, give or take, and you have 500 backers, well, you've lost $500. If you have 5,000 backers, well, you've lost $5,000. So I would always, when I was, learning the platform, when I was learning, manufacturing, I would want to gear toward lower campaigns, smaller campaigns, $20 games that were, deck of cards, things that were fairly easy before exploring bigger projects. I've learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes, and fortunately they were smaller campaigns, so it wasn't as bad. But I did have friends, I did meet people in all walks of life who lost tens, $100,000 on Kickstarter because they didn't realize that it was possible to do that with a successful campaign, and it is. I personally didn't consider Indiegogo because Kickstarter is an invaluable tool, and they do have such an incredible user base, audience that is important to access. And I'm sure Indiegogo has an audience, but I don't know that it compares to what Kickstarter brings. And I think the board game community in particular is pretty fond of Kickstarter, so it's really hard to kind of go against that grain. So I know that some campaigns might use both, but that's not something I've ever personally explored. Reading comments. Okay, so um, another thing I want to talk about is why someone might seek out, a Kickstarter campaign over, pitching to a publisher. And a lot of the time I hear, well, I thought about pitching to a publisher, but I didn't want I don't think it's fair that they get all the profit. And so that's something I really wanted to talk about, and because I think it's a really easy misconception that, publishers are the ones that are making all the money, the big publishers, and that's not necessarily the case. And to talk about that, I want to break down a potential project. So, with Napkin Math, if we're talking about a game that is, going to be sold for $30, of course, if we're talking about a game that's going to be sold for $30, production's probably going to be in the ballpark of $5 or $6. Freight, which is the cost to get your game from where you're producing it, which is most likely going to be in China, to your warehouse in the United States, is probably going to be about $1 per copy. So factoring that in, it's about $7 to make your game to bring it over here. What a big publisher is looking for is for volume. And by doing that, they are going to sell it to distribution. And generally, they're going to sell a $30 game for about $12, which means if you're doing your math here, $12 minus a $7 cost to get it here is probably going to be about $4. So I want to make it clear that publishers aren't, most publishers are not, sitting here, counting all the money that they're making. They're really taking big bets that it's going to move volumes and make up that money. The thing that, so many notes. Okay, when you pitch to a publisher, you're saving the time that it takes to run a campaign, to do all the business backend, bookkeeping, marketing. Running the campaign itself is a lot of time. Producing the game, talking to the factories, coordinating, getting it over here, doing later on sales. That's a lot of time that you're not going to spend if you're pitching your game and having it signed by a publisher. You're also not going to take any of the risks. So you're not spending money on art just to not have it fund. You're not risking overproducing, miscalculating any of the costs. Wish I was counting money. Debbie says, I wish I was counting money, but no, I'm working on a Kickstarter right now. So yeah, you're not going to take all those risks that a publisher would have to take. They have all the risks. So yes, maybe they make a little bit of more money if it pays off, but you don't have that risk at all. You also don't have the expenses of advertising or marketing, having any staff handle the logistics. You don't have any expenses of shipping your product over or the long-term expenses of storing it. You don't have to go to conventions, pay for booths, pay for demo teams to have staff and demo your games. All that's covered by the business of a publisher. I feel like I'm saying a lot. The other thing to keep in mind is when you pitch to a publisher and they pick up your game, they have an existing audience and business relationships with distribution and localizers, which are other publishers in other countries who might be interested in bringing their catalog over to France and doing your game in French or German or China. There are existing business relationships that you can take advantage of when you have your game signed by a publisher. So it's really probably, even if you're making a smaller piece of the pie, it's probably going to be bigger in the long run, because you have that bigger access to potential customers. So a lot of the barriers that I hear some friends saying is that, I've tried pitching my game around, but I haven't had any publishers like it or want to sign it. And I kind of want to point out that publishers want to sign your game. Publishers, attend panels and what is it, date nights when you at conventions, when you speed dating, when you pitch to multiple publishers at the same time. They attend conventions to look for these games. They want to sign your game. It's a business, and they make money by finding good games and bringing them to the market. So it's something that they want to do. It's just they know the market, so they are um, probably looking for something specific. But I just want to make it clear that publishers want to find a game that they like. So it's not that uh, you can't find a publisher. It's that you have to make sure that you're finding the right publisher who wants to pick it up. Jenna asked, what's a typical fair royalty deal between a publisher and a designer? I haven't been able to find much on this. So I can link it after the live stream. There is a chart that was done by, gosh, I can't remember the name. Give me a second. There's a great chart that was done by some great industry people the name is slipping my mind right now because I am like in the middle of being stressed out from the election like everyone else is. Cardboard Edison. Cardboard Edison did this great chart based on surveys from designers, from publishers. What do you usually get? Do you get a commission? Do you get a royalty rate? Do you get an advance? How much is your advance? And it's just this comprehensive chart that I would love to link after the live stream. Generally, I think I don't usually do contracts, and I'm not a designer, so I don't know, but I want to say it's somewhere between 5 and 10%. It's going to vary because some publishers do it based off the MSRP, some do it based off net sales, so it really varies. I think the chart is going to be the best thing to look at. Yes, Cardboard Edison, thank you, Debbie. And if anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to take them. I'm about 27 minutes in and running out of points to talk about. Another thing that I want to bring up is a lot of designers don't necessarily, who don't have publishing experience, aren't necessarily looking at their game from whether or not it's producible. And what I mean by that is if your game is 20 minutes long, but it takes 20 dice that times 6 colors, so we're talking about 100 dice. It's probably not producible. And the reason that I would say it's not producible is because the amount of money, the amount of cost it would take to make that game is going to be more than you can reasonably sell it for if it's a 20-minute experience. So 20-minute experience, you're probably going to want to sell somewhere between $20 and $25 at the most if you really want to be competitive in this market. And a game like that might cost, $15 to produce. So make sure if you're going to run your, thank you for, Debbie just linked that Cardboard Edison reports. If you're going to pitch your game, or if you're going to run your, or if you're going to launch your own Kickstarter, it's important to make sure that your game is producible for the experience that you're providing to the end consumer. And really important, if you are going to run your own Kickstarter campaigns, there are a few pieces of advice that I want to make sure to give. It's really important to talk to an attorney and an accountant. It shouldn't cost that much to do to get, a little piece of advice or to, start an LLC, which I really recommend doing. An LLC is a business, a limited liability corporation in the United States, and it basically covers you if you get, a lawsuit or, to file your business taxes. It's really important to kind of get that paperwork from the beginning and to make sure that you're covered. Generally speaking, it costs somewhere between like $100 to $500 to just do the paperwork to start an LLC. And it's important. It's an important step to take. And I can't stress this enough that if you aren't in a position to spend that kind of money on an LLC, on doing the paperwork right, starting a business right from the beginning, and not everyone is. Everyone is all walks of life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's not a position that you're in, please reconsider bringing your game to Kickstarter, because when you bring your game to Kickstarter, you are opening up yourself the possibility to lose quite a bit more than that. So that's just something that I wanted to point out. Another thing that I want to, really advise on is to open a business bank account. It's so hard to do paperwork right if you have to go back and try to clean up something. So if you are going to take this step to launch a Kickstarter, open a business bank account, decide how much money that you're willing to invest in art, if anything, or if you're how much you can put toward marketing, and put that in your business bank account, put that as an investment, and make sure that you're paying your expenses out of that account. Because at the end of the day, when you've collected your money, when you've paid out your expenses, you're going to need to know how much you spend. And the reason is because you're going to have that much less to pay in taxes, or maybe nothing if you ended up losing money. But if you don't have that record, it's going to be very hard to go back and kind of figure out what happened. So if you're going to go down the route of running a Kickstarter, make sure to open up a different bank account. Make sure you realize that you're starting a business, and do it right from the beginning, because it is so important to have that kind of record. Jenna said, if my game for design has a mechanism, I have not ever seen it anywhere. Should I be worried about pitching it to a different publisher and the idea getting stolen? Is there a cheap way to get it patented or copyrighted? So this isn't really something, this is a fear that a lot of game designers have at the beginning, having their ideas stolen. It's not necessarily, game design isn't necessarily about the idea, it's about the execution of the idea. So there are so many designers in the industry who are willing to share ideas, because it's not, the concept of code names even, it's not necessarily about the idea of having, a secret name and trying to figure out who it is. It's the rules, it's the execution. If a publisher likes your game, they will sign it. If they think it's a great mechanism that's new and it's right for them, they're going to sign it. It's not worth opening up themselves for liability by stealing your idea to save the 4, 5, 6% of royalties to not pay you. If it's a good game, if they want to publish it, they will sign it. They're not going to steal the idea. And if you have something that's new like that, that's exciting for the market, that they'd probably want to jump on it. Publishers know the market. They're pitched 100 times a month, maybe more. So they know when something's new, they know when something's exciting, they know when they're excited about something. They're not in the business of recreating something that's being pitched to them, especially if it works, if people are enjoying it, if you've play tested it and it's been, and you think that it's in a good space from, being well-rounded and well-designed. They don't want to take the time to recreate that concept just to not have to pay you a royalty. So theft in the industry is really not something that I've ever seen, that I've had any of my friends experience. So it's really not something to be worried about. Patenting and copywriting, I have seen so game design isn't really copyrightable, I think. Design isn't. I have seen a few new creators go out of their way to trademark names and things like that, but I haven't. All the advice has been it's not worth that kind of investment, because it just doesn't happen. Do you feel that Kickstarter was maybe easier to do 10 years ago, and it's much harder with how saturated the market is? Some people might be thinking of running a Kickstarter now. Yes, absolutely. So it is something actually I really wanted to talk about. If you're going to run a Kickstarter, look at previous Kickstarters, and it's really important to look at Kickstarters that were made within the last 1 to 2 years. Kickstarter is changing so much all the time, month to month, year to year. It is a completely different field than it was in 2018, in 2015. Um, so it's really easy to see, oh, this game with, with not quite professional level art made, $50,000. But it's important to know if that was made in 2014 or if that was made yesterday, because it's a very big difference. The amount of creators on the platform, the amount of competition on the platform, the level of professionalism on the platform is just increasing constantly. So make sure to compare what you want to do to something that's recent. And if you're going to go back into 2018, look at what they offered. Look at if they offered free shipping. Look at if they delivered. Look at if they delivered on time. These are things that you should know if you're going to base, this campaign offered free shipping. It's important to know, well, maybe they didn't fulfill. Maybe they fulfilled 6 months late because they ran out of funds. These are things and other accesses that you can look at with that kind of history that's important to keep in mind when you're pricing your game, when you're deciding what kind of measurement you want to run your campaign against. If you are going to run your campaign, I can't say this enough, price out everything. Make your game the exact version you want to be when the campaign ends. Price out every aspect of your stretch goals. Know what you would offer in advance. Don't ever launch your campaign, see that it's going well, and decide that you're going to throw something you didn't expect at the beginning of the campaign in. Because when you do that, you're cutting into your margin. And you can't go back and say, well, it was a $20 game, and then I decided to add, metal coins, and that cost $5, so I'm going to charge everyone $5 more. When you launch your campaign, you're setting in the price, and so you have to know what your end cost is going to be with all your stretch goals included, or you're really giving yourself the opportunity to lose money unexpectedly. Price out what it's going to cost to ship. If you're offering, worldwide shipping, if you're shipping it from one location, know what that's going to cost. If you're offering EU shipping for, EU friendly shipping, Australia friendly shipping, know what it's going to cost to get your product into the EU, or know what it's going to cost from a VAT perspective, because when you're sending games to the EU to distribute within the EU, you do have to pay those taxes up front when you import the games. So know what it's going to cost so you're not surprised at the end. And something else to keep in mind when you are offering things like EU-friendly shipping, just because another campaign offered EU-friendly shipping, things like that make sense when your campaign is, when you have 10,000 backers and you can freight an entire container into the EU. If you have 100 backers, the cost of getting your product into the EU is considerably more. So make sure if you're offering things like that, you know what it's going to cost if you barely fund, because you should always be going off the worst case scenario. And if you can make your margins better by having more backers, then great. But know what the worst case scenario is going to be and prepare for that. And if you have extra at the end of it, great. If anyone else has any questions, I feel like I've just been chatting for an hour. I guess I have. That being said, like, Kickstarter is a great tool. It's a tool that if it didn't exist, like, I probably wouldn't be in the career I'm in. I learned a lot of my experiences from Kickstarter. I've learned the business from Kickstarter. I just think it's important that you know what you're getting into when you decide to launch it. You know that it's a business. You know that there's potential to lose money, even if, it's flashing green and it looks like, you've made $10,000. You could still lose money if you're not prepared. And I think that it's very important to know what you're getting into. But it is a great tool if you are prepared for that, if you are prepared to take a risk, to run a business, to try to do a campaign, just know what you're getting into. Anyone else has any questions? No, I think that's most of the things that I have to talk about. How do you feel about early bird specials and add-ons? I think that's a great question. So early bird specials are something that were really popular, I want to say, up until around 2015. Recently, I haven't really seen it in the board game community. The reason why is because a lot of backers are put off by missing out on something. A lot of people back Kickstarters because they are completionists, because they want like Kickstarter stretch goals, they want to get in at the beginning, they want to be part of the experience. And when you, um, yes, early birds are great for initial momentum because you have that fear of missing out, but as your campaign proceeds, you're alienating those who didn't see it from day one. Not that they wouldn't have backed day one, but they didn't see it from day one, and kind of penalizing them for not being aware of it. And it really tends to slow down momentum and add that kind of bad feeling that you don't need to add during a campaign. There are much better ways to keep it positive throughout. Um, Add-ons are great, especially if you have a business model. So Jelly Bean uses add-ons to sell existing product. They purposefully produce a little bit extra at the end of the campaign, but when we're talking about like maybe 100 extra copies later on, and they use add-ons through a pledge manager to sell extra products. So that's a great way to add a little bit more money. I think the best way to capture the kind of benefit of an early bird would be Kickstarter exclusives, which are components or trinkets or like metal coins or things like that that you can add to your campaign that you're promising won't be available later. And if you're a new creator, especially if it's your first campaign, you're probably not going to be able, or you're going to have a harder time getting into distribution. It's not an easy thing to do. So it's much easier to be able to promise that it won't be available later. So you kind of can work that to your advantage. You can say that these coins won't be available later because this is your market, this is your main audience, and that's an easy way to kind of reward them for being with you. Sarah asks, should designer publisher contracts look different if the game is being Kickstarted? I have seen it both ways. I have seen designers, I've seen publishers just offer a standard contract, and it's their prerogative whether or not they want to kickstart it. They might not even know when they sign their game if they're going to kickstart it. And I've also seen designers who have negotiated for an extra point or an extra percentage of Kickstarter, of the Kickstarter total. So, I've seen designers say, okay, well, this is, what the price is, but I would also like an extra, 1% of the Kickstarter funds. So I've seen it both ways. Some publishers, don't mind, some aren't as willing to negotiate. So it really just depends on your contract, on how excited the publisher is to grab your game. So it really depends. Why do some big publishers use Kickstarters when they definitely don't need money to fund the production of the game? So a lot of the time, publishers will use Kickstarter to be able to make the game even better than they would have been able to do if they had just published it themselves. There's a lot of upfront costs with the kind of game that a big publisher is going to bring on Kickstarter. So for example, if we're looking at a game that has a lot of miniatures, like Simon games. If we're looking at games like that, they have a lot of upfront costs, a lot of molds, tens of thousands of dollars worth of molds sometimes, depending on the game. So Kickstarter is a way to help fund a game and make it better than it would have been otherwise, especially if we're talking about games with minis where if they had just brought it to like if they just brought it through the normal way of production, it might have only, they might have done 5 miniatures of the same, shape and style, whereas with the Kickstarter, by bringing it to Kickstarter, they can do completely unique ones. So there are ways to kind of utilize Kickstarter support to make the product even better. So I think they're all the questions. I don't know if I missed anything, but yeah, guys, thank you so much for for your questions, for keeping me company, for keeping me sane during the insanity of this week. I hope everyone's doing well as can be expected. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on Facebook. Um, if it's just a quick question, I'm happy to do what I can to just kind of point you in the right direction. Maybe it's not something I can answer. Maybe it's something that I can, introduce you to someone or give you a little bit of advice. But I do try to be as available as I can be in the industry. That being said, I am one person. Thoughts are only my own. My advice is only my own. I can't speak for everyone. I can't speak to all experiences. But if there's something I can offer you, I'm here to help. So, have a great night. Bye.